So it's a pleasure now to give the floor to Antonio Aledo, full professor at the University of Alicante, PhD in sociology and Master of Science in anthropology. He is environmental sociology and sociology of risk at the university. He teaches, environmental sociology and sociology of risk at the University of Alicante, and director of the Socioeconomic Observatory of Floods and Droughts at the Institute of Water and Environmental Sciences.
Good morning, everybody. And first, we want to thank BRE for the invitation, for this opportunity of getting in contact with you all. For us, it's an honor, it's a pleasure, but also it's a challenge because we, Guadalupe and I, we belong to a different, we would say, epistemic community. So we are sociologists and we work in, with a different background. We don't work with numbers. We work with words, narratives, image. And but as Betty has several times said last night in the wonderful meal, dinner that we had to find some point of some way into to find a place in where we can talk more or less in the same language, because it's necessary for a holistic approach for disaster management. Well, what we want to offer you, first we would like to present our research team. We are a group of environmental sociologists from the University of Alicante. We are specialized in the analysis of the social aspect of disasters. We have two projects that Guadalupe is going to present later. But also we have a Latin American network of research with friends in Brazil, in Chile, Colombia, Bolivia, Mexico, Puerto Rico. And we have a kind of, and we are specialized in social impact assessment. For the last 20 years, we have worked on social impact assessment of large public works. And from the last 5 or 6 years, we translate the social impact assessment methodology to the analysis of disasters. And this is our research field. What I want to make a kind of brief introduction first to environmental sociology. What is environmental sociology and what an environmental sociologist do when we study disasters. Then we would like to introduce our methodology of social impact assessment applied to disasters. And then Guadalupe will present our research and our model, the model that we use in order to understand the social aspects of disasters. Environmental sociology studies the social factors that participate in the generation of disasters. We analyze the causes, the social causes of disasters. We analyze the consequences, the impacts. We try to offer also alternative or solutions. And finally, we also study the discourse on disasters, because disaster is also it's a physical fact, but also is a discourse. The disasters can be understood as a punishment of gods, errors in planning, or we can discuss about the capacity of technology to control natures, or we can approach through social vulnerability studies. So there are disaster also has this duality. It's a social fact, but also, excuse me, it's a physical fact, but also is a social fact. And we try to understand the environmental sociology studies the interaction between society and environment. And we apply this approach to the study of disasters. Environmental sociology states that nature has no problem. There is always the anthropic intervention in nature that alters the natural cycles. So we try to pinpoint the social causality of the environmental problems. So we environmental sociologists, we think that we have a relevant task in the face of the social environmental crisis, because there is not environmental problems. There are always social problems, because society is are always in the base of the problems. So we have to understand why land degradation, why we provoke land degradation, or what are the social causes of the land degradation. And I said before, we belong to different epistemic communities. Kant said that human beings belonging to two kingdoms, the kingdom of nature and the kingdom of spirit, the kingdom of the facts and the kingdom of the ideas. In environmental sociology, we make a distinction between noumeno, that is this reality as it might be in itself, independently of our experience of it, but also human beings live in the phenomenon. Is the reality dependent on the transcendental subject, is the social reality. And human beings live in these two worlds, the physical, but also the social world. And disasters share this also double nature. We have a disaster as a physical fact, but also there are social causes and social consequences of the disaster, and a narrative which explain and describe and build the disaster. And environmental sociologists try to understand the interaction between these two worlds. Because environmental problems always have a social origin, and because problems are socially defined and perceived. We have here the definition of some picture of what happened in Alicante 2 years ago, and this was the reason that we are studying starting our projects. We have presented the main difficulties that appear when we work in interdisciplinary teams with researchers belonging to other epistemic communities. Some scientists have called this tension ontological pluralism, because these differences arise from different conceptions of reality. Environmental sociologists understand that human beings live in a double reality, a material reality, noumenon, and symbolic reality, phenomenon. This fact has deep outcomes in disaster risk studies. Sometimes the definition of reality imposed by technicians and risk managers doesn't correspond to the values of local population. For example, until recently, domestic animals, dogs, cats, pets, didn't receive attention in flood emergency plans. However, many people consider these animals as part of their family, and therefore they claim that their pets should be included in rescue actions. When these families try to save these animals, they might place themselves in risky positions. Reality conflicts can also occur when risk management plans are developed by institutions or companies that are physically or culturally distant from the area at risk. On many occasions, local knowledge about heavy rain is unconsidered, but it can be much accurate than the information provided by aerial photographs or flood maps. We can discuss if this technical data is much real than the experience of the disaster by the local population. Let's take a closer case to explain this central idea that human beings live in two worlds, in the world of things and in the world of ideas. In Alicante, heavy rains in September, usually in September, are produced by an atmospheric process well known called cold drop, or DANA, is isolated the depression in higher levels. 70% of the territory, of our territory, which is the southern of Alicante, 70% of the territory of our case study is classified as a higher risk flood. However, the mayors of this municipality demand zero risks of flooding and blame the risk managers, in our case, la Confederación Hidrográfica de la Cuenca del Río Segura, for the effects of flooding. In spite of 70% of the territory is classified as high risk flood, the mayors demand zero risk. The mayors point out that floods are avoidable through the application of more structural measures. And they state that floods are a technical and a financial problem. What I'm trying to explain is that the interpretation of the floods is not only a diagnosis, but also a discourse that constructs a reality. For the mayors, floods are due to errors in planning. And planning is erroneous because our region, I mean, this area, is poor, and this region doesn't receive attention from the politician from the center, from Valencia. This is the political center of the Valencian region. What I'm trying to say is that the discourse, this is the discourse of the mayor in this case, the discourse has practical consequences for flood risk plans in this region. Any flood plan without a lot of structural work is going to be rejected by the mayors and the local population of these municipalities. Probably the diagnosis is not quite right, it's wrong, but this is the social environment in which risk flood managers must deal with. In practical terms, this diagnosis or this narrative is so real as the diagnosis of the experts. Of course, I'm not saying that it's equally valid, but the discourse constructs a socio-political reality that affects risk management and must be taken into account. We accept that disasters are complex processes in which hazard is one of the main elements that produce them. We also assert that disasters are social products, and we can justify this social nature of disaster for two reasons. Risk is also a product of the type of social relations. Let us not forget that there is risk because there are benefits. And the risk is not just a matter of probability. Yeah. Risk is a political product of different types of social relation. So don't forget that there is risk because there are benefits. And there is risk because there are elites which monopolize the benefits and whose power is capable of transferring the negative effects of their decisions, risk, and impacts to other spaces or to other social groups. For example, in Latin America, it's very common for families with scarce economic resources to build houses in flood-prone areas or in steep slopes. The absence of social housing policies and structural poverty led them to occupy high-risk areas. Hazards are also interpreted and constructed through discourses, and these discourses should be analyzed for their influence on risk management. I think it is important to emphasize that risk management is a technical practice, but also a social one. We think that maybe you will agree with me that the great difficulties faced by risk managers are much more in the social field than in the field of the technological problem solving. I try to insist, disaster has a physical nature, but also is a social product. It's a social product of some type of social relations, and also is a social product because it's a narrative that people use in order to understand the disaster, but also in order to get some benefits from the disasters. We have already seen this formula that is well known by you all. Risk is the result of the interaction between hazard, exposure, and the ability of individuals and communities to cope with natural hazards. Researchers have tried unsuccessfully to transform this formula in numbers in order to measure risks. We believe that this approach can be, well, maybe it's not the right approach. This formula, at least as we think, this formula is not for measuring, it's for thinking about risk. Our approach prioritizes the identification of social risk factors, knowing why and how they are produced, understanding the social and natural process of production, and understanding how these factors are unequally distributed among affected populations. Of course, as we have repeated several times in this talk, our approach doesn't pretend to be hegemonic in the analysis and management of disasters. This approach, our approach, intends to complement, to add the social part of that also compose and participates in the production of the disasters. Since 7 years ago, we have transferred social impact assessment methodologies to the field of natural disasters, seismic risk and floods. Social impact assessments were born with the aim of complementing economic and environmental impact assessment. The application of social impact assessment is voluntary. Some companies carry out social impact assessment as a tool to manage what they call risks for business, conflict with local communities arising from mismanagement of social impacts, And in other occasions, social impact assessment can be demanded by the local communities to use this assessment when conflicts go to court. Dialogue between different science and disciplines requires accepting the coexistence with different ontologies and with different ways of interpreting reality. This coexistence face ethical and ontological challenges. Environmental justice is a priority issue in environmental sociology and is being transferred to social impact assessment. We understand environmental justice in four ways. Distributional justice. Social impact assessment is concerned with the unequal distribution of impacts. For us, is a key issue. Procedural, distributional. Social impact assessment is procedural. Social impact assessment is concerned with the incorporation of those affected in the evaluation process, participatory methodologies. Recognition. Social impact assessment insists on recognizing the rights and interests of those affected, especially the most vulnerable population. The introduction of environmental justice principles in impact assessments requires a prior ethical and political reflection on what, for whom, and why we do impact assessment. The great challenge for social impact assessment when participating in multidisciplinary projects lies in how to incorporate intangibles or unmeasurables impacts into the assessment. How can we explain that the main bias made by science is the reduction of complex reality to numbers and figures? And what is truly astonishing is how it's possible for this numerical narrative to be transformed into a narrative of truth. The objective of the social impact assessment is not to measure. Its main objective is to understand the social production of the impact in order to collaborate in the correct formulation of measures and proposals and improve disasters management. Social impact assessment applied to disasters has the following objectives: to understand the sociopolitical factors that participate in the production of the disaster, to make visible the social impact of risk, to highlight the unequal distribution of impacts, to complement economic, environmental, and engineering evaluation, and to generate solid knowledge to improve flood management, focusing on the impacts experienced by individuals and families. Floods cause impacts on the environment, on infrastructures, on productive structures, and also cause impacts on people and their well-being. This impact, the social impacts, are quite difficult to identify, measure, and manage. The definition of impact in social impact assessment is radically, ontologically different from that used in economic and environmental assessment. And I would like to stress this difference. Social impact assessment, social impact refers to the impacts actually experienced by humans in either a corporeal or cognitive sense. How, for us, a social impact is how people experience physically or cognitively the consequences of a process of change or a disaster. So the impact is how people feel and understand the impact of the disaster. So from this ontological definition, we have to go to a epistemological approach that drives us to a participatory methodologies. This conceptualization of impact is conducive to incorporating participatory methodologies because it requires that those affected themselves collaborate in identifying and understanding the impact. The World Meteorological Organization proposed the following categories of social impacts caused by floods: loss of lives and property, loss of livelihoods, migratory processes, psychosocial effects, barriers to economic growth and development, and political consequences. And this World Meteorological Organization has offered a long list of impacts that we use like a checklist or a pre-list in order to assess the social impact of disasters. Social impact assessment is divided in 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 stages: the baseline study, stakeholder analysis, impact assessment, which is divided in identification, evaluation, and ranking, proposal, and monitoring, and final report. The baseline study tries to understand the essential aspect of the disaster. We analyze the hazard and the territory, the community, and the social context. Stakeholder analysis is a key element in our research, in our methodology, because we try to identify the stakeholder that must be taken into account during the design and implementation of the analysis. We try to understand their interests, their needs, and their expectation. And we would like to highlight this step of the social impact assessment because impact are unequal distributed into the population. Then we have the central phase step in our analysis, the impact assessment, which is divided in identification of the impact, evaluation of the impact, and ranking the impacts. And then we have the proposal step in order to avoid the impacts, minimize, repair, or in some way compensate. Then monitoring and final report. Which are the tools that our team use to assess social impacts? We use a variety of different kinds of tools. We use impact matrix with 3 functions: to know the social distribution of the impact among the different stakeholders, to break down the impacts by different reference categories in order to understand their nature. We use different analytical categories in order to understand deep the understanding of the impact. And also we use impact matrix in order to ranking according to the different analytical categories or reference. ¿Ya? Ya, estoy terminando ya. Ya, this is the last one. We don't want to measure impact. We want to understand social impact production. So we use causal maps in order to understand how people feel the impact. We usually ask for an impact, and we ask the affected people what are the causes of each impact, and we try to go hacia atrás. backwards. Why and why and why and why. And then we produce this kind of causal maps in order to understand the history, the history of the impact. Impact as an expression of a complex of causes. And when we have a lot of causal maps, we have a lot of factors and interactions. So then we use a software called HEFI. And we put all the maps and all the factors and all the relationships, and we construct these kind of maps in order to understand the relationship between the maps, and we can identify which are the most important impacts, which are the deeper, which are the effects, in order to understand the complexity of the impacts. I think it's gonna be enough for today and for this terrible English that I'm using. I apologize. But now Guadalupe is going to use a better English, and she's going to explain what I say in the practical research that we are doing. Thank you very much.